There are few discoveries more unsettling than an empty ship drifting across an open sea. No distress call, no signs of violence, no bodies, just a vessel carried by the wind as though its crew had vanished between one heartbeat and the next. For more than a century, people have argued over what happened aboard one of history's most famous ghost ships. Every generation has offered a new explanation, yet none has answered every question. The facts are real, the evidence still exists, and the mystery continues to challenge historians, sailors, and investigators alike. Today, we're following the trail of a ship that seemed to sail straight out of a nightmare, leaving behind only silence, unanswered questions, and a story that refuses to disappear. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The discovery immediately raised questions that have never been fully answered, and every answer seemed to create an even greater mystery. How could a ship remain afloat in good condition while every person aboard disappeared without leaving a single confirmed trace? If the crew abandoned the vessel voluntarily, what danger could have been so frightening that they left behind their food, their belongings, and nearly everything they needed to survive? Why was there no clear evidence of violence, no signs of piracy, and no indication that another ship had attacked them? If they escaped in the vessel's missing lifeboat, why was it never found, despite years of searching and countless theories? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, was there one small clue aboard the ship that investigators misunderstood from the very beginning, causing generations of experts to search for answers in the wrong place? These weren't simply questions asked by curious readers. They became the focus of maritime investigators, historians, and experienced sailors who spent decades examining every surviving document, every weather report, every logbook entry, and every witness statement. Yet the deeper they looked, the more difficult it became to separate fact from speculation. What initially appeared to be a straightforward maritime emergency slowly transformed into one of history's most enduring ocean mysteries, leaving behind a case that still inspires debate well over a century later. And to understand why this abandoned vessel continues to fascinate the world, we first have to go back to the day it began, what should have been nothing more than another routine voyage across the Atlantic. What makes this story so remarkable is that it did not begin with a disaster. It began with confidence. The vessel had earned a reputation as a dependable merchant ship, built to cross long stretches of the Atlantic while carrying valuable cargo between Europe and North America. Its captain was an experienced seaman respected for making careful decisions, and the crew had completed difficult voyages before. Those waiting back home expected another routine journey, another successful arrival, and another safe return. Nothing about the departure suggested that this voyage would become one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. As the ship sailed farther into the Atlantic, daily life appeared ordinary. The crew worked in shifts, maintained the sails, checked the cargo, and carefully recorded the ship's position in the captain's log. Meals were prepared as usual, conversations filled the deck during quieter moments, and every passing day looked much like the one before it. The weather was not perfect, but neither was it extraordinary for that time of year. To anyone watching from a distance, the voyage seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. Yet hidden among the routine entries in the logbook were small details that would later attract the attention of investigators. None of them seemed alarming on their own, but together they hinted that something aboard the ship had begun to concern the people responsible for bringing it safely across the ocean. Then, without warning, the written record stopped. There were no desperate final messages, no detailed explanation of an emergency, and no indication that a violent struggle had taken place. Days later, another passing vessel noticed a ship drifting alone across the sea. From a distance, everything appeared normal. The sails were still catching the wind, and the ship remained upright as if it were still under command. But as the rescuers drew closer, an uneasy silence settled over the water. There was no movement on deck, no voices calling out, and no crew rushing to greet the approaching ship. The closer they came, the more one question refused to leave their minds. If the ship was still capable of sailing, where had everyone gone? The boarding party stepped onto the deck expecting to find injured sailors, a captain in distress, or at the very least some sign that an emergency had forced the crew below. Instead, they were met with complete silence. Every step across the weathered planks deepened the mystery. The ship had not been torn apart by a violent storm, and there was no evidence of a battle. The rigging was still standing, the cargo remained largely untouched, and many of the crew's personal belongings were exactly where they should have been. It looked less like a vessel that had been abandoned forever, and more like one whose crew had disappeared in the middle of an ordinary day. As the search continued, the details became even more difficult to explain. Inside the cabins, everyday items remained in place, suggesting that no one had packed for a planned departure. The galley showed signs that normal life had continued until shortly before the ship was deserted. Navigation instruments and supplies were still aboard, while the valuable cargo had been left behind, ruling out simple theft as the most obvious explanation. Investigators searched carefully for evidence of violence, but there were no clear signs of bloodshed, no damaged cabins pointing to a desperate struggle, and nothing that immediately explained why every soul on board would leave a seaworthy ship behind. One important detail did stand out, however. The ship's lifeboat was gone. Whether it had been launched in an organized evacuation or carried away by another event would become one of the central questions in the investigation. News of the abandoned vessel spread quickly across ports on both sides of the Atlantic. Newspapers printed dramatic headlines, and before long, the public had begun offering explanations of their own. Some believed pirates had intercepted the ship, while others insisted the crew had encountered a violent storm that forced them to abandon what they believed was a sinking vessel. More imaginative stories spoke of sea monsters, unexplained lights, or supernatural forces. But experienced investigators focused on the evidence rather than the rumors. They knew that somewhere among the scattered clues was a logical explanation. The challenge was that every promising theory seemed to answer one question while creating two more. The mystery was no longer just about an empty ship drifting across the ocean. It had become a puzzle that challenged everything people thought they understood about survival at sea. And the deeper investigators looked into the facts, the more elusive the truth became. The official investigation began with the simplest explanation first. Experienced maritime authorities reconstructed the ship's final known route, compared weather records from the days before it was discovered, and interviewed every captain who had crossed the same waters. Their goal was straightforward: determine whether a natural event had forced the crew to abandon the vessel. At first, the evidence appeared to point in that direction. The Atlantic was known for changing conditions, and even veteran sailors respected how quickly calm seas could become dangerous. But when investigators compared the surviving logbook entries with reports from nearby ships, the timeline refused to fit neatly together. The weather alone did not seem severe enough to explain why an experienced captain would order everyone to leave a ship that was still capable of staying afloat. Attention then shifted to the cargo. Among the supplies on board were barrels of industrial alcohol intended for commercial delivery. Maritime experts proposed that fumes escaping from some of the barrels could have alarmed the captain and crew. If they feared an explosion, abandoning the ship temporarily in the lifeboat might have seemed like the safest decision. It was a reasonable theory, and one supported by later scientific experiments showing that alcohol vapors can create dangerous conditions under certain circumstances. Yet there was another problem. The vessel showed no evidence of an explosion, no widespread fire damage, and no destruction that would normally follow such an event. If the crew had escaped only until the danger passed, what prevented them from returning to a ship that remained afloat and largely undamaged? As investigators continued piecing together the final hours of the voyage, another possibility emerged. Perhaps the crew had secured the lifeboat to the ship with a rope, intending to stay close until they believed it was safe to return. If rough seas or a sudden shift in the wind caused that line to snap, the drifting vessel could have slowly sailed away while the people in the lifeboat were left helpless in the open Atlantic. It was a heartbreaking possibility because it required no violence, no pirates, and no extraordinary event. Only one decision made under pressure and a cruel combination of wind, waves, and timing. Even today, many maritime historians consider this one of the strongest explanations. But despite its logic, it remains a theory, not a proven conclusion. No confirmed trace of the missing crew was ever recovered, leaving one final question hanging over the case. If this explanation is correct, why has the ocean never given back the evidence that could finally close one of history's greatest ghost ship mysteries? As the years turned into decades, the abandoned vessel became far more than a maritime investigation. It became a legend. Writers, researchers, and documentary filmmakers revisited the evidence again and again, each convinced that one overlooked detail might finally unlock the truth. Some argued that the captain had acted exactly as any responsible sailor would under the circumstances, believing that leaving the ship briefly offered the best chance of saving everyone on board. Others believed there were still missing pieces of the story, pointing to inconsistencies in witness accounts and unanswered questions surrounding the ship's final recorded position. Yet every careful review reached the same frustrating conclusion. The available evidence could support several explanations, but it could not prove any one of them beyond doubt. Modern maritime experts have had the advantage of technology that investigators at the time could never have imagined. Computer simulations have recreated the ship's likely course. Oceanographers have studied historical currents across the Atlantic, and scientists have examined how weather conditions could have influenced both the drifting vessel and a small lifeboat. These studies suggest that if the crew became separated from the ship, the distance between them could have increased within minutes, leaving those in the lifeboat powerless to catch a vessel still driven by wind filling its sails. In the vastness of the Atlantic, a single mistake could quickly become irreversible. The ship could continue its lonely journey, while the people who had spent days caring for it disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind no witnesses and almost no physical evidence. That possibility makes this mystery so enduring. Unlike many famous historical cases that were eventually solved through new discoveries or advances in forensic science, this one remains suspended between evidence and uncertainty. Every preserved document, every surviving logbook entry, and every expert analysis brings us closer to understanding what may have happened, yet none can answer the final question with complete confidence. Perhaps the crew abandoned the vessel believing they would return within minutes. Perhaps changing winds and powerful currents separated them forever. Or perhaps there is still one crucial piece of evidence resting somewhere beneath the Atlantic, waiting to rewrite everything we think we know. Until that day comes, the ghost ship found with no crew remains one of history's most haunting reminders that even in an age of maps, navigation, and careful record-keeping, the sea is still capable of keeping its greatest secrets beyond our reach. Before you leave, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Which explanation do you believe comes closest to the truth? Share your theory in the comments below. And if you enjoy real historical mysteries backed by documented evidence, don't forget to subscribe because our next investigation explores another disappearance that has challenged experts for generations.